Welcome everybody. Very excited about this event this evening for a number of reasons. We've got some fantastic speakers and we've got a large number of attendees, which is marvellous. So thank you for all making the effort to come along this evening. So the event is Hearing LGBTQ Voices in Museums and the Archives. So a very slight divergence from our theme of oral historians, but very closely related, as you can see. And I think some of the speakers will be addressing oral histories within the archives as part of their talks. So I'm Claire Summerskill, as it probably says on my video thing, and I'm very delighted to be the chair of the Oral History Society LGBTQ Special Interest Group, which we shorten to SIG. For the special interest group. So when we talk about the SIG, we mean all of that. We are part of the Oral History Society. We are a special interest group that's set up about 5 years ago now. And we've been going from strength to strength in that time, holding lots of meetings, lots of events, producing a special themed edition of oral history, and a number of other exciting projects that we've done over this time. Our vice chair is Alan Butler, who is in attendance somewhere. And our secretary, there he is waving. Hi, Alan, he's in Plymouth. And George Severs is our secretary, and he's actually running this meeting technically. So also our membership committee member is Martha Robinson Rhodes. And our website committee member is one of the speakers, Mark Etheridge. So we're excited to have them on board as well. Now, if you would like to become a member of the SIG, so the LGBTQ Special Interest Group, part of the Oral History Society, we would love you to do so if you're not already. And if you want to, please, could you contact either me or Martha, and we will put, could you do that, George? Could you manage to put an email address to contact my email address, if that's all right, the admin at clairesummerskill.co.uk, if you're at all interested in becoming a member of the SIG. And if you are, we can send you, make sure you're kept in the loop about future events, about newsletters, about the oral history conference, what we'll be doing there, reading lists, and lots of other things that we can share with you. But our main intention as a group when we formed was so that oral historians, LGBTQ oral historians around the country could find out what was going on with other people, because before that it was pretty hard to know what all the projects were and who people were. So that was one of the main motivations of us setting up this group, and it's just been such fun. So this is going to be a really interesting event tonight. We have as the chair for this event, Norena Shopland. Thank you for doing that, Norena. She has a master's degree in heritage studies and has worked for the British Museum, National Museums Scotland, and the Museum of London, among others. She's now living back in Wales, and she's worked with leading heritage organisations, including National Museums Wales, Glamorgan Archives, and Cardiff Story Museum. And her most recent publication, which is very exciting, is a practical guide to LGBTQIA historical records. So that's just a little bit about the chair for this evening, and she's going to explain who the speakers are and the shape of the evening after that. So I'll hand you over to her. Norena.
Great, thank you very much, Claire. Welcome everyone, and thanks for coming along. We've got some great talks this evening, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what our three speakers have to say. We will be taking questions after all the three speakers. So if you could either put your question in the chat or say that you'd like to ask a question, and we'll come back to you. It's best you don't use the raised hand feature, because with so many of you, there's quite a possibility we might miss you. So put it in chat, or just put a note that you'd like to ask a question. So we're going to kick off this evening with Dan Vaux. Dan is a media producer and freelance museum professional. He is co-project manager of the Queer Heritage and Collections Network, supported by the Art Fund and the National Heritage Lottery Fund. And he's developed LGBTQ plus tours and programming for the V&A Museum, the National Gallery, National Museum Wales, the Tate, University of Cambridge Museums, among others. And he's a patron of LGBT plus History Month. So over to you, Dan.
Thank you very much, Norena. It's a delight to be here with you all. And I'm going to share a screen with you so I can show you some pretty pictures because I don't know, you're probably sick of seeing me. So I've noticed that there is also some familiar people in the audiences as well. For example, there's Jack Shoulder in the audience. My apologies, you're going to see photos that you've seen before. Eventually we'll get back to the museum and we'll be able to take new photos so I can get a whole new set of photos to share with everybody. But I am here on behalf of the Queer Heritage and Collections Network, but I'm going to wear 3 caps today. So see if you can work out which one I'm wearing at different times. But the National Heritage and Collections Network, we started up about a year ago. And in that time, we've managed to sort of grow into quite a sizable organization, which I'll tell you all about. And already Norena's kind of given a hint as to what's happened to us. We've received new funding as well, which is quite significant because there's some exciting opportunities coming up, which I'd love to share with you. But I said pretty pictures. Look at all those wonderful people. I miss this so much. I came into the V&A for the first time since lockdown 1 million, and it was a little sad not to be able to guide people around and take them on LGBTQ plus tours. But this is something we've been doing for about 6 years now at the V&A, and it's what got me into all of this. But it's led to really exciting different projects working with lots of different people. You know, Norena's kind of hinted at some of those, but I do miss the sheer thrill of having so many bodies together celebrating queer history in our spaces. But I mentioned Jack Shoulder. There's Jack, lovely Jack there with some more of our team, plus other friends from the British Museum and also the Schurz Museum in Germany. So for us, the idea of connecting with other groups and connecting with other organizations to make sure that we can share research is really important, and it's something that I think has been ingrained in very much in what has led to the way that I think about how we approach the Queer Heritage Collections Network, which I should add that I'm just one of the co-project managers of. Rachel Lennon is the other co-project manager, and we're supported by a wonderful team of independent researchers as well, including Lucy Whitehead and also Chris Reed, so Cardiff and Belfast represented, as well as the North. But here's a lovely bunch of people that also do LGBTQ plus tours at Tor Cardiff. But Mark, I know, will be in the group talking a little bit later on the panel. So I just wanted to throw some more wonderful smiley faces at you. I don't know if you're in this. No, you weren't there with us that day, but you've been with us on other days, definitely. And of course, you know, this idea of doing LGBTQ plus tours, it has taken me to all sorts of different corners of the world. This is just another team of volunteer-led guides, volunteer guides that do LGBTQ plus tours across 7 different museums in Cambridge. But I do want to talk about oral histories with you today. So one of the other hats that I'm going to put on is just with Queer Britain. And Queer Britain is very much a new organization. We're a new charity that is seeking to become the first bricks and mortar LGBTQ plus museum. So we are currently doing lots of work to capture what's happening in the queer pandemic at the moment. So we're actually working with Justin Bengry and also Dr. Molly Merriman, so Goldsmiths University as well as Kent State University. So they're leading on a major project at the moment for us called Queer Pandemic, and it's very much about collecting, on one hand, oral histories, on the other hand, videos, but very much part of that is to kind of work out what's happening with our queer community right now. You know, there's some early research that Justin and Molly have already done that are starting to identify things like the fact that we are, you know, LGBTQ plus people, we're more disproportionately affected by the pandemic. There are certainly things that exist, the structures that exist that oppress us, you know, it has been exacerbated within the pandemic. And this is one of the strands of the research that they really want to hone in on and find out more about and collect that and form it as part of research, and also form part of the strategy of Queer Britain, look at how we can address this. So I want to just very quickly show you a video clip, which I realized that I need to make sure that I can share sound. So let me just try sharing screen one more time with you and adding the word share sound. There we go. So now you can see and hear the video that I'm going to show you, which is helping with the project as well.
There's certain emotions you don't know that you even felt about something until you've actually now got on paper and you realise, and it actually makes it very real.
Your voice is the biggest instrument you will ever be given.
Write your open letter.
Be part of history.
So we have partnered, as you can see, with the Post Office and also Levi's, and they have helped us kickstart a campaign that came just slightly before the queer pandemic, but is now forming part of that. And a lot of it was to start to collect people's letters, open letters to Queer Britain. And we've started to receive letters already. They're absolutely wonderful to see. They have been stored at the Bishopsgate and the Bishopsgate Institute. Steph Dickers is, as you all know, remarkable, wonderful, and is a great custodian for many of the artifacts that we've collected for Queer Britain, but the letters have started to pour in. And they're really lovely and sweet to see. You know, the people have drawn rainbows on them, as you'd expect. They've poured themselves into this, and we're starting to get a picture of what it's like. You know, what is it like to be LGBTQ+ right now? And that was very much some of the things that have formed part of the submission that Justin and Molly are putting together to work on these oral histories that are part of the queer pandemic. I don't know what slide comes up next.
There's certain emotions.
So for us, I think that's a really key element of our work. We've had pop-up exhibitions previously, and they, pop up and pop back down. It is really important for us to maintain a sense of presence, even in the pandemic, because it's important for us to kind of ensure that people are aware that we're here and we're coming in terms of being bricks and mortar. So the research is vital for us, and I will make sure that I can drop a link to a panel discussion that was held with some of the, with Dr. Molly Merriman, with Justin Bengry, also with Joe Galliano, who's the CEO of Queer Britain, and also Asifa Lahore, who's an incredible contributor already. He started off as someone who was in one of the videos you saw in the video just earlier, but has now become a really core part of our organization, because as someone who's Muslim and disabled and transgender and person of color, they're on so many different panels for us now as well, and helping inform the strategy for the museum. So it's just really lovely to sort of see how a small step of inviting someone to write a letter has led to a really strong long-term relationship as well, in the span of about a year. But Asifa is incredibly important to us as just an example of one of the people that we're involved with. And I think I wanted to also just introduce another organization that is nearby, is just sort of down the road for me. This is Gunnersbury Park Museum, and Gunnersbury Park Museum being a wonderful museum that is the Borough Museum for Ealing and Hounslow. And therefore, in both Ealing and Hounslow, there was a wonderful performer who was very prominent in our two boroughs, and you could probably guess who it is. It's not precisely this person, but certainly being performed here by a drag king performer as Freddie Mercury. But the museum holds around about 600 oral histories, and just before the pandemic, we were able to start training up volunteers to carry on this wonderful collection that we've got. But we recognized that there was a lack of LGBTQ+ stories, and so we wanted to make sure that there was more. And we had a great team, people who are part of the OHS, to come along and train up these volunteers. And we've started to now collect some of the memories of people from within the borough. Some of them are self-memories, others are memories about, key people within the borough as well. And I just wanted to show you some of the things that has led to as well. So I've got a short video to show you, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about the Queer Heritage and Collections Network. But this is a little history that we recorded with one of the councillors from the borough, plus one of our fantastic youth members of the Gunnersbury Park Youth Forum.
Hello, I'm Councillor Catherine Dunn. I am the Cabinet Member for Communities and Climate Emergency at the London Borough of Hounslow, and my portfolio covers equalities and inclusion. So I'm really pleased to be celebrating LGBT History Month this month. I want to tell you a little bit about my local gay hero, E.M. Forster, the novelist, who lived for some time at Arlington Park Mansions in Chiswick. Forster was born in 1879 and died in 1970, and he's famous for the novels A Room with a View, Howard's End, and A Passage to India. His novel Maurice was published shortly after his death, but it was written nearly 60 years earlier. It's a homosexual love story that caused some controversy when it was published, as Forster's homosexuality had not been widely known. Forster had to hide his sexuality for most of his life. He died 3 years after the legalization of homosexuality, and shortly before he died, he said, "Now I'm 85, how annoyed I am with society for wasting my time by making homosexuality criminal, the subterfuges and the self-consciousness that might have been avoided." So today, I'm glad that people in the UK no longer have to hide their sexuality, and I stand in solidarity with those around the world who are fighting for their rights.
Hi, my name's Daria. Ian Forster was a British novelist who lived in Hounslow for 20 years from 1939 because he wanted to escape central London during World War II and be closer to his lover, Bob Buckingham. He wrote novels such as A Passage to India, A Room with a View, and Maurice. The novel Maurice was published a year after Ian Forster passed away. It's a story based on gay love in Edwardian England, also made into a movie in 1987. A quote which I like best from Forster is, "We cast a shadow on something wherever we stand," written in his book, A Room with a View. For LGBT+ History Month, we chose Ian Forster to represent mine.
So I just wanted to show that because I'm really, really proud of the Youth Forum. They did so much great work as part of LGBT+ History Month to kind of bring this together. And I think it's just great to sort of see how the volunteers are starting to work through with them as well. So they're starting to pick up LGBT+ history, and they're celebrating it as well. So that's, I wanted to show you two quick, very quick examples of oral histories being collected at the moment, and then just sort of tell you about how I would love to support you. Rachel, Len and I would love to support you as part of the Queer Heritage and Collections Network if we can. So if you want to jump to the University of Leicester website, you'll find us there. There's a lot of information there, but at the moment, we're now 75 organizations. In the last year, we've brought in lots of organization, and membership is free. So that helps. And that means that we now include community archives, we include independent collections, local authority collections, national museums as well, but it is across 4 regions and nations, which is quite significant for us to make sure that we've got that full representation. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the fact that we've now received 2-year funding. So we're going to carry on for 2 more years. We already had 1 symposium earlier this year, and we've now secured 2 more symposiums. And so what that means is we're going to be sharing some of the things that the founding partners are excellent at, and making sure that we can share things like good practice guides, how to get involved and how to make sure that you can do the best that you want to do. One of the things that we've done is start to map the needs of the sector, and these are the 12 things that were sort of felt that was in key demand from our organizations. And so if you want to take a quick screenshot of that, I'll also drop you a link so you can see the symposium document from this year as well. But I think this is very much what we'd love to kind of get involved with, and make sure that, if you need support, if you need to make connections, if you need mentoring, we're definitely there and are ready to support you and get you linked up. And if you're involved in oral histories, or just looking at, making things that involve audience engagement or interpretation of objects, certainly something that we can support with. There's a great team involved. So that's me, and I look forward to speaking with you further in the Q&A section.
Great, thank you very much.
At the bottom.
Thank you very much, Dan. That was really interesting. Great to see so many projects, and glad to hear you've got more funding. If you've got any questions for Dan, please put them in the chat, and we'll come back to them after all 3 speakers have finished. So moving quickly on, we're now going to hear from Mark Etheridge. Mark is Curator for LGBTQ+ History at St Fagans National Museum of History, which is part of Amgotha Cymru National Museum Wales. And he's currently actively building up the LGBTQ+ collection at St Fagans and promoting this collection to drive awareness of the importance of museum representation in telling the story of Wales's rich LGBTQ+ history. Mark is also co-founder and co-host of Hannah's LHDT Plus Cymru, the LGBTQ plus research group of Wales. So over to you, Mark.
Great, thank you. I'll just share my screen. Oh, I just need, oh, great, yeah. Great. Okay, thank you. So as Norena mentioned, I'm Mark and I'm Curator of LGBTQ plus History at St Fagans National Museum of History. And for those who might not know it, St Fagans is part of a group of 7 museums and a collection centre run by Amgueddfa Cymru, National Museum Wales. It's on the outskirts of Cardiff and was opened to the public in 1947 as the Welsh Folk Museum. The intention being to create an open-air museum on the lines of places such as Skansen in Sweden. And today, following a £30 million redevelopment and being awarded the Art Fund Museum of the Year prize in 2019, St Fagans is Wales's most visited heritage attraction. As well as 3 gallery spaces, it also contains over 40 original buildings from all over Wales that have been moved and carefully re-erected. Since its opening, St Fagans has not simply been about preserving the past, but to benefit the welfare of communities and share their lived experiences. At St Fagans, representation through communities and being part of a community is at the heart of what we do. St Fagans has an important oral history archive. It was started in March 1958, following a public appeal that was launched on BBC Radio. The funds from the appeal allowed the museum to buy recording equipment that would enable them to record people in remote areas without electricity. And today we have over 12,000 recordings in the archive. Initially, the Oral History Archive concentrated on recording tradition, dialects, and was very much focused on rural life. However, since the 1980s, its holdings have broadened, and in recent years, it has also become a repository for oral histories collected by community groups and organisations across Wales, from Mencap Cymru and Merched y Wawr to the Jamaican community in Port Talbot. Whilst the Oral History Archive is becoming increasingly diverse, we had very little representing the LGBTQ community in Wales. In early 2019, I took on responsibility for the LGBTQ collection at St Fagans, with an aim to build up this collection to be fully inclusive of all the LGBT plus community in Wales. Being based in St Fagans, it was natural then that any collecting would be supported with oral history recordings. So today I'll tell you a bit about how at St Fagans we've been collecting and using oral histories as a way to both to add interpretation to both our collections catalogue and also in exhibitions and displays. Before lockdown, I started work on cataloguing a collection of t-shirts and badges donated by a lesbian who was active with various women's groups in South Wales during the 1980s and 90s, as well as in LGBTQ activism, such as protests against Section 28. These objects had been collected by a colleague a few years before, but I recognised it as an interesting and important collection with potential for further engagement and display. I wanted to be able to tell this collection through the words of the donor and to make sure that their lived experience was at the forefront of the cataloguing and in any future displays. So I arranged to do an oral history interview with her. As part of this interview, I asked the donor to talk about each object in turn, discussing who wore the t-shirt or badge, where it was used, and what the symbols meant on each one. Even though I knew the meaning of many of the symbols, I felt it was important to hear this in the words of the donor, especially as some of the symbols might be more important or mean something different to her, or perhaps have other meanings that I wasn't aware of. So on the screen here is one of the t-shirts from this collection. The t-shirt has the women's symbol used to make up part of the word only. The quote from the donor is taken from the oral history recording, where she describes the symbolism of this t-shirt, and most importantly, what it meant to her, a subversive statement of our lesbian identity and our women-to-women love. I've incorporated the quote into the museum catalogue, which gives greater context to the description. And on the right is a screenshot from the museum's collections online catalogue. And similarly, with these badges, the catalogue or any display could be enhanced by using a quote from the oral history, with the quote giving more context, but importantly showing that the object was used and worn by someone and the importance of that personal connection. So in this quote from the recording, the donor talks about being part of Cardiff Women's Centre, where she says, "I was part of Cardiff Women's Centre, which was based in Coburn Street. Being a lesbian mother myself, I volunteered there for quite a number of years." We have a number of recordings in the St Fagans archive which discusses being a mother, but this is the only one where someone talks about what it's like to be a lesbian mother. So over the last few years, I've been working with a South Wales-based social and support group for LGBTQ+ ethnic minorities called Glitter Cymru. Glitter Cymru was founded in June 2016 by Vish, who was born in Cardiff of Indian descent. The aim of the group is to provide a safe space and to empower its members to feel that their LGBTQ+ identities are valid and to be heard, seen and celebrated. I interviewed Vish along with a few other members of the group before the first lockdown, and I hope to be able to do some more soon. In the recordings, we discussed the international background of Glitter Cymru. Her members come from various countries, including Pakistan, Morocco and Nigeria. We also discussed what it was like for them to grow up LGBTQ+, and in some instances, their differing journeys to Wales. Glitter Cymru very kindly decided that they would donate their banner to St Fagans, and it can be seen here at the top of the slide, and in the photograph below being carried at a Pride event. The banner was made in 2018 and has been used by Glitter Cymru at various Pride events, including Cardiff, Barry, and most importantly, the first ever BAME Pride in Wales. The first Welsh BAME Pride was organised by Glitter Cymru and held in August 2019 at Catay's Community Centre in Cardiff. The event began as a way to celebrate the 3rd year of the founding of Glitter Cymru, but more importantly, it was a way to engage with the local community and to give a platform to LGBTQ+ voices, identities and talents. So although the banner may seem as ephemeral and made of plastic and card, it's very evident from the recordings I've done with the members so far that the banner symbolises something very important to Glitter members. The banner was donated at the time of the first Glitter Cymru interview I did, and so I was able to discuss the banner in each interview to get a feeling of what the banner meant to its members and where they felt the banner belongs. So I'm just going to play a clip from a recording I made with one of its members, a bisexual woman of Turkish and Egyptian heritage, talking about the importance of the banner and what it represents to them. So I'm hoping the sound will play. Let me know if it doesn't, can you please?
And having that banner, it kind of gives us the authority to have an identity that, and a narrative that we create ourselves, that is not dictated by the white LGBT community and is not controlled by the white LGBT community, but comes from us.
You heard that okay, did you? Okay, if I turn up my, does that sound any better if I play it now?
And having that banner, it kind of gives us the authority to have an identity that, and a narrative that we create ourselves, that is not dictated by the white LGBT community and is not controlled by the white LGBT community, but comes from us.
I was also interested to find out in one of the recordings that Glitter members actually discussed at one of their meetings whether or not they should give the banner to the museum. As a group, they were happy to see the banner go into the Welsh National Collection, with one member in a recording stating that, and I quote, "By giving that banner to Wales, it is a sign that we accept Wales as our home. So I hope to display the banner at St Fagans in the future, and these recordings, along with a small collection of photographs of members with the banner that were also donated by Glitter Cymru, such as the one you can see on the screen now, will be vital as a part of the interpretation, so the importance and significance of the banner can be told through the voices of its members. So one of the members of Glitter I interviewed was a gay man who came to Wales from Morocco seeking asylum. We discussed his persecution for being gay in his home country, his journey to Wales, and how he was treated during the asylum process. We also discussed the importance of glitter to him and the banner. He kindly donated this red belly dancing outfit. As a curator, I was thinking about how in the future we could display the dress, as just collecting the dress alone would make interpretation and display more difficult. So I made sure that I did the interview with the donor after we had identified the dress as a potential donation, so that in the interview we would be able to talk about its importance and meaning. I also collected from the donor the photograph you can see on the left, here showing him wearing the dress at the Big Queer Picnic in Cardiff in August 2019. And the image on the right is a museum record photography shot of the dress. So this means we had a suite of items, a dress, photograph, and oral history recording. This will now allow us to display the dress and aid the interpretation with a photograph of it being worn, and enhance the caption with quotes from the oral history, or even as we have done in some of the St Fagans displays, use the actual voice recording. In the recording, the donor talks about the belly dancing dress, what it means to him as a link to Morocco where he was born, how he got involved in belly dancing in Cardiff, and where it was worn. So I'll just play a short clip from that recording.
The first time I got the dress and the first time I wore it, it was for a fundraiser. And that's when a lot of people who attended the fundraiser, they invited me to Pride, the alternative Pride, which is the Big Queer Picnic. That's when I performed the second time with the dress. And then in a fundraising event for a trans man from Saudi Arabia who needed top surgery. And again, in Goody Who, I wore it again. And the last time I wore, again, in the second edition of Queer Big Picnic, and then in Bay Me Pride. The first.
So once we have collected these objects and their related stories, we need to be thinking about how we display. This slide shows one of the displays in the New Wales Is Gallery in St Fagans, and I put it in to illustrate how we use audiovisual material to allow some of the objects to be told through the voice of the people who donated them, or to allow the objects to be interpreted by people who have a lived experience and can add their story to the narrative. The photograph shows Captain Moore, who was featured on the video in the background, looking at a teddy bear on display in the case. His daughter used to pack a teddy bear in his bag each time he went away. You can see also on the screen to the right a page from one of the flip books for this case, and we have them alongside each display case in the gallery. These have been used not only to provide extra background information, but also to add quotes from oral history recordings, in this instance with Captain Moore. So I've been working on a project to record LGBTQ voices from the army in Wales. I started this just before the first lockdown, so I've only managed to complete 2 recordings, but I hope to do some further recordings and collect objects as soon as I'm able. One person I spoke to was Franky. Franky was born in Swansea and came out to her family as a lesbian when she was 14. She joined the army in 2013 and spent 5 years in the regular army before joining the reserves in 2018. In the oral history, she discusses what it was like growing up as a lesbian in Swansea, why she wanted to join the army, and her thoughts on how or whether being a lesbian would affect that. So I'll just play one last very short clip from the recording. It says how important it was for her to be in the army and for the army to be seen at Pride.
Just shows our support to Pride, to the LGBT community. I think it's a massive thing, and also for recruitment. Some people feel they can't join if they're perhaps LGBT, when actually that's completely wrong.
So once I've done a few more recordings and collected a few more relevant objects, it would be good to look afresh again at the army case I've just described at St Fagans, and maybe add some LGBTQ+ experiences to the displays. So I hope this just gives you a bit of an insight into the work we are doing at St Fagans in making sure that the museum is relevant to Wales today, that every community is represented, and that their stories are being told through their own voice. And then this is my last slide with just some contact details. So diolch yn fawr, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was really interesting. It's always nice to see how museums are expanding their collections and using their collections. So moving on quickly, last but definitely not least, we have Tom Furber, who is an engagement and learning officer at London Metropolitan Archives. Tom's remit is informal adult education and community projects, and as part of this wider scheme of work, he's worked on programs and projects that cultivate and share LGBTQ+ perspectives on archives and histories. And these include the award-winning Speak Out London Diversity City, the ALMS conference, and Out Loud, the London Metropolitan LGBTQ+ archives. And he supports and regularly hosts London Metropolitan Archives' monthly LGBTQ+ history club. So Tom.
Hello, thank you, and thank you for having me. Yes, so it's my pleasure this evening to tell you a little bit about London Metropolitan Archives, a little bit about what we've been up to, a little bit about the collections that we have, and of course take your kind of questions and discussion points. So I'm just going to share my screen, just so we've got a few visual aids, but they're shouldn't be too critical to proceeding. So you should now be able to see our website. So first, let me give you a bit of context to London Metropolitan Archives. So, as the name suggests, we're a London-based archive. So we are the archive we're the archive for Greater London. So we're sort of owned and run by the City of London Corporation, but our remit covers the whole of London, not just the square mile or the city. We're a very big archive, so we're the largest local authority archive in the country, and the second largest archive in the country, second only to the National Archives over in Kew. To put that in perspective, the way you measure the size of an archive is you imagine what would happen if you measured every shelf in the building. So we measure them in kind of miles of shelving space. And we have, depending on who you speak to on a given day, around about sort of 60 miles or just over 100 kilometres worth of shelving. It's worth thinking how big that is for a second. So that's from sort of London to Brighton. Our material covers the shelf from London to Brighton, and we go back about 950 years. Our archive goes back to 1067 with a charter given to the City of London by William the Conqueror. And it's our remit as the archive for this Greater London area to tell the story of London and Londoners, to collect that history, the evidence of that history, to preserve it, and also to make that accessible to kind of anyone and everyone who is interested in it. So we have those two roles of preservation and access. And it's worth thinking kind of how that history comes to us and what comes to us, and then what kind of gets lost and what gets collected along the way, because that gives the background to some of the broader community work that we do, specifically the LGBTQ+ community work that we do, and more specifically still the kind of oral history work that we do within that. So archives are created by individuals, by communities, by networks, and by organisations. They're created by the rich, the powerful, by the non-rich, the less powerful, everyone in between. We all create stuff as we go about our business, and this can be kind of archival evidence broadly defined for future historians. But, and there's always a but, isn't there? Depending on what kind of archive it is, depending on who it's created and how, that can affect how likely things are to end up in a place like London Metropolitan Archives. And what ends up in an archive can, of course, kind of reflect the kind of wider societal context in which it is produced. So It tends to be, speaking in general terms, it tends to be that organisations, things like governments, churches, businesses, those sorts of things, tend to be, those sorts of records tend to end up in an archive a bit more readily than archives of individuals, of smaller groups, that sort of thing. And it tends to be that archives that sort of fit in with the kind of prevailing social norms are more readily kept than others. So I'm sure you can sort of see where this is going. For much of history, of course, there's sort of been a narrative around LGBTQ+ lives of criminalisation, of medicalisation, and kind of moral judgments. And the kind of institutions that perpetuate those narratives tend to have, historically speaking at least, been the kinds of organisations that we keep, and we kind of have those records. So there's a danger, probably less so than in the past, but there's a danger certainly of sort of the so-called LGBTQ+ history that somewhere like London Metropolitan Archive keeps, if not really being history kind of as seen by and experienced by LGBTQ+ people. It's kind of like a history about them. And that's something that we've kind of sought to rectify over the years. I sometimes think of it in terms of first person and third person history. So it tends to be perhaps historically that we have third person accounts by other people, LGBTQ+ lives, and less of the first person accounts, that's kind of lives in their own terms. So as part of our mission to properly represent and preserve the history of London's, we've sort of taken quite sort of active measures over the last, in rough figures, 20 years, probably close to 18 years, to actively collect and seek out and kind of build a space where LGBTQ+ issues can be discussed, build those relationships, and in turn hope that might provide a more natural pathway for those kind of collections to come into the archive. We've done a lot of work in that area more generally. I might just talk about, for the sake of bounding tonight's conversation, I'm just going to talk a bit about two projects that we've done, which I think illustrate these issues quite nicely, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the activities that we get up to, and maybe kind of pose a bit of a question for the future and discussion. So the first project I'd like to talk about, and you should, if the screen share is working correctly, you should be able to see the website there, is a project called, just scroll all the way to the top, excuse me, called Speak Out London, Diversity City. Now, it's, if I get my dates right, around this of 2014 to 2016, and we had a lot of help and partnership with the esteemed Claire Summerskill. She was a very important part of this, this project. And now I'm in this terrible position of describing the early days of a project that Claire worked on and I didn't. I came a bit later. So forgive me if I get this wrong. I'm very happy to be corrected. But my understanding is, and this project basically came about, was given some urgency by the anniversary of the partial decriminalisation of homosexuality in this country. Sort of it would have been the 50th anniversary of that, and a kind of a realisation that as the hours and sands of time pass through the hourglass, there's sort of a generation of people who have sort of first-hand memory of that, who we kind of risk losing their testimony. That was kind of an impetus for it, but from there the project kind of grew and grew to be kind of a more wider effort to kind of capture a moment in time of London LGBT history. Is that a fair summary? Is that a fair working summary, Claire? We happy with that? Yeah. Well, if you speak now, or I say forever hold your peace. And by forever, I mean until the Q&A in about 10 minutes time. So we'll assume that that's okay. And it's worth, so that was the impetus behind that project. And it also then grew into this idea of maybe talking back and kind of necessarily challenging the archival collections that we have. So this Speak Out project had two main strands to it: an oral history collection, which has grown to sort of 50+ oral histories, and also an effort to collect ephemera and things like that, to collect the other side of the story. And it's now given us, well over 50 hours of interview, which are housed at LMA, and there's also a website which we can see on the screen where excerpts from those interviews are available. And we're sort of an oral history meeting, so it's probably people probably familiar with this, but it kind of it's worth repeating how important kind of oral history testimony is, and how it's such an important kind of complement to the more formal collections that we hold. So oral histories allow us things that more traditional archives don't. So first of all, it allows us some kind of degree of access and recollection and record keeping of events that were deliberately sort of secretive or furtive. We heard that very powerful quote from Ian Forrester about the kind of almost the kind of mental load and the subterfuge that the kind of criminalisation of homosexuality required. Well, we talk about historical evidence a lot, about what evidence do we have of how people lived in the past, but actually in this context, that evidence has a double meaning, and one's a lot more sinister. This is also criminal evidence. It's evidence of kind of criminal behaviour, and so people are unlikely to, or less likely to, keep things that could end up in trouble with the law. They're less likely to keep diaries of lists of contacts, things like that, because it can end in trouble. So oral history allows us an imperfect, possibly, but certainly a way to kind of reconnect with those things that were deliberately hidden. And also, when we're looking at LGBTQ+ history, some of the things that we're talking about is obviously physical. We're talking about spaces. We're talking about activities. We're talking about all different things like that. Of course, a lot of it is invisible. A lot of it's intangible. It's to do with attraction. It's to do with kind of affective things. It's to do with emotions and feelings. And these are things that sort of aren't neatly summarised in archival documents. You know, we talk sometimes about the script not being the play. That actually sometimes when we're dealing with kind of thoughts and feelings and ideas and wants and longings and reactions and indignities and all that sort of thing, there's no substitute for people articulating them in their words. So oral histories are a very kind of important kind of complement to these more formal collections. And I think once upon a time, me saying these things, once upon a time me saying that it's important for archives to have oral histories would have been controversial. I think it's fair to say that nowadays it's fairly accepted that this is an important thing to do. And this idea of collecting oral histories and perhaps proactively collecting oral histories to plug gaps in our collections, to kind of cover the weaknesses in our collections, was reflected in another project that we partnered with, and that's just recently come to an end. And this is the Harrow Vanguard collection. And this again is an oral history project, and also an attempt to collect ephemera at the same time. What's interesting about this project, I think, is how it's a collaboration between several individuals and organisations. So the project, if you like, was sort of hosted in a way and by London Metropolitan Archives, but it was very much a partnership with Bruce Castle Museum and Archives, the Harringay sort of I'm blanking on their formal title, but so the Harringay Local Authority kind of Museum and Archive Service, and an individual activist filmmaker, Veronica Mackenzie, and we kind of came together on this project, each providing different skills, expertise, different kind of authorities, and came together to collect around 40 oral histories. And these oral histories that relate in particular to Harringay, the borough of Harringay, between 1970 and 1990. And there's a BAME focus to this collection as well. And on the screen here, you can just get a sense of some of what the project achieved, so 40+ histories, and in a similar way to the Speak Out collection, they are available partly online and in more extended versions, this time at Bruce Castle Museum and Archive Service rather than at LMA. And excuse me, I'm not checking my text. I'm just making sure I've got time. I don't want to overrun. One important thing I think to stress in both these projects, I think it's really important in terms of practice, is how they need to be kind of collaboration and kind of equal collaborations, that all parties involved bring different things to the table. As an archive service, we can provide expertise in preservation, in storing documents. We can provide some administrative and even financial support. We can provide guidance on how to store and collect things and how to make things accessible, but there's huge limits to what we can do. There's huge limits to our kind of oral history expertise. There's huge limits in really our networks, who we can talk to, who want to talk to us. There's issues around us being the City of London Corporation, very much sort of a, historically speaking at least, a small C conservative organisation, being very much an establishment organisation. There's questions there around legacies of trust around criminalisation. So it's important that these were kind of all collaborative projects, all kind of and equal collaborative projects, bringing different people together, different levels of expertise. So that's perhaps something to think about. I just want to end really with thinking about the future, because in particular, since we did the Speak Out project, I mean, only finished about 5 years ago, but in some ways that feels like a very long time away. So we made a decision then to have extracts on a website and have full digital archives only held on site. That was partly for practical reasons, but also partly around kind of protecting the identity, protecting the stories, being kind of proper and dutiful custodians of the collections that we hold. And I think that's something that really needs thinking about in a kind of a new digital landscape, where it's not actually a very big deal for us to potentially share 50 oral histories digitally with someone. That can be done in a very straightforward manner. That has huge advantages in terms of access, in terms of research, furthering knowledge. It's our job to spread knowledge. Digital knowledge lets us do that. But then there are huge questions there around ownership, and not necessarily LMA owning it, but having some degree of oversight on what things are used for. I both want to share the collections so they can reach as many different people as possible, but there's a bit of me that has really sort of trepidations about this. If we lose too much oversight of it, does someone else's story then exist in the ether? It can then be used, but even misused. At what point does someone's ownership of something disappear? At what point is a very kind of cozy, well thought through conversation you have in your front room? At what do you then sort of lose control of it and it kind of takes a life of its own? And how do we kind of manage people through that process? That's something that is occupying a lot of my sort of mental time at the moment, and I'd love to hear other people's sort of thoughts and reflection on that as well, both from the rest of the panel and the kind of experts we have in the room. That's me 30 seconds overdue, so thank you very much for your time and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Tom. That's great. And the LMA has got such a brilliant record in collecting LGBTQ plus across the board. Right, open to questions or comments. Please stick them in the chat and we'll either read them out or get you to read them. Tom, I think you may have to shoot off early.
What I'll try and do is I'll try and stay a bit longer. I'm basically butting up against the time the archive closes. If the security guard starts knocking on the door, I'll disappear. But failing that, I'll try and stay for as much of the conversation as I can.
Right. Well, if anyone's got any questions for Tom, please stick them in the chat. Lots of thank yous and wonderfuls and nice comments. A question maybe for all three of you, and maybe if we start with Tom and then come to Dan and Mark. All three of you are from big cities. And in relation to your oral histories, how much coverage is there from more rural areas?
So for our collection, particularly the Speak Out collection, which I know a bit better than the Vanguard collection, there's more than you might think, because London exerts sort of a gravitational pull. So a lot of people will come to London. So reading through collections, the story you hear quite a lot is, I grew up in X and at some point I came to London. So I can already think of a few in my mind. If there's one in sort of rural Scotland, Claire can probably think of others as well. That idea of people growing up outside of London, and then they come to London because that's what people do for economic reasons, but also because it's sort of centre of gravity, important centre of gravity, and the kind of anachronistically to sort of say the LGBTQ plus scene. There's quite a bit.
Dan?
I just want to take the opportunity while we've got Tom's screen up as well, just to say that never miss an opportunity to promote. Mark Thompson has very kindly recorded for Queer Britain. He's doing a takeover for us this Friday. So he's going to be doing a bit of a music playlist. So we've kind of done a queer desert island discs with Mark Thompson. So he's pulled together some brilliant black music to sort of black queer music to play. So they'll be dropping this Friday. I think that's what happens with musical things, they drop. So check out our social media for all of that. Mark is just absolutely brilliant. But in terms of going beyond the big cities, yes, I think in terms of the organisations that I work with here at Gunnersbury Park Museum, we're constricted by our borough, you know, what we can bring in. But I think Tom's definitely right. There's certainly people who are pulled to the borough because of the just simple attraction of the big city for LGBTQ plus people and the search for, you know, our chosen families and that sort of thing. But I think, you know, Freddie Mercury was mentioned earlier. You know, Freddie is a refugee, one of the most famous refugees in the world. You know, I think that's another sort of interesting way in which a story is brought into a local borough collection. But for the Queer Heritage Collections Network, it's incredibly important for us to be working regionally as well. And our initial outlay of funding, we're actually going to focus on regional collections, and we're also hoping that for the second outlay of funding as well, that you know, things that will be announced very soon. So hopefully by the time that this actually goes on YouTube, it will be possible to say exactly what the details are. But yeah, we're going to try and really focus on that, supporting local regional organisations and doing lots of pairing up as well. So if we are going to be working in Scotland, for example, we're going to look at, you know, a regional one and try and pair them up with the National Museum of Scotland, for example, to kind of give them that support as well. So I think that's some of the things that we're trying to make sure that we can do in order to provide that regional presence and support what's happening out there as well.
Thank you. Mark? Mark, you're still on mute.
Yeah, I was trying to find my mute button. Yeah, so I mean, St Fagans, as the when it was first founded, was very much about the rural community and the rural life in Wales. So a lot of its earlier recordings were very specific to you know, rural Wales. It's something now I'm very much aware of from the LGBTQ point of view, because we don't have those we don't have that same sort of level of recordings for the LGBTQ community across Wales. We're quite lucky as part of Amgueddfa Cymru in that we have 7 sites across Wales, some of them in quite rural areas. So that's, you know, those are certainly areas that we need to, you know, I would like to be doing some further work in.
Thank you. And Justin has put a link in the chat, Cities and Beyond, the LGBTQ Oral History SIG map. So feel free to click on that. And staying with